Class, nice to see you this morning. My name is Mary Carol Gislin, and this is How to Survive Freshman English. Make sure you subscribe, get all my videos. I'll be here all semester to help you ace that class, okay? Today's lesson is, how long should my paper be? Now, students have been asking this question, and probably you've been asking it since you were about 10 and 4th grade and had to write your first 5-paragraph anything or 3 paragraphs. How long do they have to be? How long do the paragraphs have to be? And the answer in general is as long as it takes, right? But realistically, that's really not helpful, very unhelpful. Exactly how do you know how long it takes? How do you know when you're writing whether you're doing enough, whether you're doing too much, whether you really need to take this one over here and move it here and unpack it more, or whether you've got something and you know what, you ought to just cut it, you don't need it. How do you know all of that? And how do you know when you get to the end that the reader's going to think, oh, wow, okay, I agree. That's what you want the reader to do. Okay, now I've got some things here to talk about that are actually too much to put on my little board here, but I did create a nice infographic for you that I really want you to have. It's great to download. Ask me down in the chat below. I'll tell you where to go to get it. I want you to have this. You can print it out and put it up in your dorm room, above your desk, or carry it around with you in your notebook. Take it out and look at the questions so that as you're writing, you can figure out how long your paper should be. Okay, now what I've done is organize the essay elements against the essay qualities, all right? So here are the elements in your essay or paper, okay? You've got your thesis, you have examples, you're going to have an argument that is correctly structured, and you're going to have paragraphs that are built correctly. And then there are essay qualities, all right? These are the things that I really want you to think about. You've been kind of practicing this through high school, but I really want you to start thinking about these things. Clarity. Yep, you need to have really crystal clear clarity in your writing, all right? Everything needs to be ordered properly. And so the questions that I'm going to talk to you about in just a minute have to do with how you can figure out whether everything is ordered properly. All right? Everything you say needs to be original. Yep, it needs to be your own thought. Use your noodle. You're going to be thinking. You're going to be presenting your own ideas. Yes, you're going to quote experts in the field. And so you're going to have quotes. I have another essay on how to handle the quotes, how to get them into your paper. But your paper needs to be original. Now, you understand that if it isn't original, you get kicked out of college, right? You do not get to copy other people and try to pass off other people's ideas as your own. You are here to develop your own ideas and to get comfortable putting them on paper, and you can do that. I'm showing you how. It'll be okay. All right? The other quality of your paper is scope. How much are you trying to handle in one paper? Are you trying to handle too much? Maybe you don't have enough. You really want to hit it just right, okay? Now, there are questions you're going to ask yourself about the thesis, clarity, order, originality, and scope, about the examples that you're offering, their clarity, order, originality, and scope, okay? The argument structure, is it clear? Do I have it in the right order? Is it original? Really, my own thoughts? And scope. Have I handled enough or too much? Paragraph structure. Each individual paragraph can be evaluated for clarity. Am I saying things clearly? Are they in the right order? Are they my ideas? And am I handling enough in each paragraph? Okay, I'm going to give you an example of some of the questions that you're going to ask yourself as you write in order to determine how long your paper should be, all right? This is something that you will probably adjust as you go along. You start writing, you've got your rough draft, you go back, you realize, oh crud, I really forgot a whole example I need to be putting in here. And yes, that's going to add another 2 pages to your paper. Well, that's okay. If you really need that example, then you need to get it in there. And yeah, your paper's going to be an extra 2 pages. Sometimes the professor will give you an assignment to write no more than 7 pages, or 8 or 5. This is very important also. And you should pay attention to that. The reason that they're focusing on that, they're really driving in on and drilling down on scope, because they really want you to think very, very clearly. They want the order to be well done, well thought out, and they do not want you rambling on and on and on and on. So there is a very important and really very good practice in doing that. So if the professor has told you no more than 7 pages, then you stick to that. There's a reason for that, and it is to get you to evaluate very clearly what you're saying and not to just ramble on and on and on as if you think you're going to impress somebody because you wrote 20 pages when the question that you were asking really could have been answered in 7. Okay, but then you're just being a bore. And you don't want to be that, okay? But so how long should my paper be? This little lesson here is about an assignment where you have not been given a limit, and you're going to have to judge that yourself, okay? All right, I'm going to be working from my little infographic here, and I want you to download it, so ask me down below where to get this, all right? So, all right, the thesis. Every single one of these elements has a question in this quality to help you decide, okay? So for my thesis, the question is, does it have a single focus? You want to make sure your thesis statement is stated clearly, that you're really focusing on only one aspect of this issue that you're going to discuss in your paper. The order. Does each example that I've got really relate back to the thesis? You might find as you're writing that, oops, what is this? I keep talking about it. I'm confused. Every time I get to this section, I don't really know what to do. The problem might be that you've got an example that doesn't really relate to your thesis, and you really ought to just cut it. So this is something that happens. It's part of your evaluating and revising, as you go along. Don't be afraid to cut an example if you decide that it doesn't really belong, okay? Originality. Is it my own opinion? You've got to ask yourself that. It must be your own opinion, all right? And scope. Is it appropriate for the size of paper I'm going to write? Your thesis, I think the Roman Empire fell because of, inbreeding. I don't know. And yet, the assignment was to only write 5 pages. That's scope. Way too much. You're not going to be able to answer that question in a 5-page paper, obviously, right? So the scope of your thesis is very, very important, all right? And then I got to say that if that thesis is well written and you've got a good tight one and it's original to you, your opinion, that will help you write the rest of your paper. So be real careful. Write a great thesis statement, okay? Let's take a look at the examples. All right, now you're going to come up with examples through your research that will allow you to talk about your point of view, agreeing and disagreeing, unpacking why it's a good example, what's happening in this example, why it proves that so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever it is. The examples, clarity. Are they simply presented? Are you really presenting that? You're not trying in your paper to, you're not gonna be pompous. You're not trying to exclude your reader. You're trying to include them. You want them to understand what you're doing, okay? Is there an outlier that should be cut? Like I said before, do you have an example that doesn't quite belong? Cut it if it doesn't belong. Originality. Am I making a unique point with each example? It might be that you've got a really great example. It applies to the thesis, but as you're writing and you're kind of confused and you think, what's wrong here? It might be that the point you're trying to make with the example isn't really original. And that's okay, but you just have to acknowledge that, credit whose idea it really is, and then if the point you're trying to make is appropriate, if it really does fit, then just work on how you're stating it to make sure that you really are claiming your original point of view about that example. Or cut the example, maybe. Or just say, here's another example of my opponent's viewpoint, and then go on to the next example. Maybe you're only going to use the example to the competing point of view. Okay. All right. And the scope are my examples are the very best ones I could have found to support my thesis. This is really important. You might have a couple examples in there that, yeah, they're okay, but they're not really the best ones. And frankly, they're just making your paper long. Cut them. Even if they support your thesis, if they're not great and you've got really great examples, you don't need the not so great ones. So go ahead and get rid of them, okay? All right, let's take a look at your argument structure, okay? For clarity, are my transitions between each point that I'm making, are they clear? Now I've got another lesson on transitions, how to write transitions. You can go to that one if you want to, but I'm not going to define them right here. But to evaluate your argument structure for clarity, are my transitions clear? This is very important. Also, the order. Do my points that I'm trying to make in my argument proceed logically from one to the next? This is something that will kind of come out in the writing of your paper. Sometimes you're kind of confused in the middle of it. You think, what is wrong here? Every time I get to this paragraph, my eyes glaze over and I don't even know what I'm saying. Part of the reason might be because your argument structure is not quite logical. Now, that doesn't mean that paragraph that you're in that's causing you problems doesn't belong. It might mean that you need to reorder what you're saying there. Maybe that is the first thing you should be saying, or maybe it's the last thing. Either way, just take a look at the order of your argument structure, okay? And then originality, is each discussion point unique? Now, that doesn't mean they all have to be unique. You can quote somebody that you agree with. You, of course, make sure you're citing all your quotes and you're giving credit where credit is due. You do not want to be accused of plagiarism. I do have another lesson on how to handle quotes in papers, but I'm not going to talk about that now, okay? And then finally, is each logical point in my argument covered? Did I get it all in? And that will also determine, if you've correctly handled the scope of your argument, okay? Lastly, paragraph structure. Take a look at the quality of the writing in the paragraphs themselves. For clarity, does each paragraph have only one topic? Now, I'm going to do a lesson on the theory of paragraph structure, which sounds kind of weird, like, is it really a theory of paragraph structure? There kind of is, and it sort of is changing a little bit. But basically, the point of chunking your writing into paragraphs is to just help your reader follow along your ideas. And so it is a way to present just one idea at a time. So double check that. Make sure your paragraphs are really handling only basically one idea at a time, okay? Order. If I read each sentence aloud, does it make sense in that paragraph? I really urge you to read parts of your paper out loud, if not the whole thing. You will hear things in reading it aloud that will just go right over your head when you're reading silently. This I think, is a really important part of revising and finalizing your paper. So I recommend it. Read it out loud. Make sure all the sentences are feel like they have a logical order within the paragraph, okay? The other thing, originality. Am I repeating myself over and over in a paragraph or in two paragraphs? Make sure you're not doing that. Get rid of repetition, all right? And finally, the scope as it applies to paragraph structure. Have I covered all the points I intended to cover? Am I repeating any points? And that I've got an extra paragraph I don't need. I already talked about that. Now that kind of tends to happen from one section to the paragraph, from one section of a paper to the next, and this can happen in longer papers. Sometimes you get to page 9, say in a 12-page paper, and you think, I think I already talked about this, didn't I? Make sure if you've got that kind of nagging feeling that you already talked about this someplace else, that you go back and check, because if you're repeating yourself, cut it out. Make sure you've actually got it in the section that it really needs to be in, but double check that affects the scope of your paragraphs and ultimately the scope of your whole paper. Okay, now this is a lot. I kind of threw a lot out at you, and I really think you do need my little infographic here. So ask me down at the bottom where to get it, and I will tell you where to get it so you can post this. I think these questions are real helpful, and ultimately that's the answer to how long should my paper be. And I know ultimately it is the answer to as long as it takes, but there isn't really any other way to say you need 500 sentences. When you get those kinds of assignments, they're nice exercises. I actually think they're very important, kind of good for you. But once you're getting into just long paper writing, you're not going to do that. You need to evaluate yourself how long it needs to be, okay? All right, I know you can do this. Got my infographic. Wonderful to see you. Next lesson is the difference between writing and revising. There is a difference, okay? You want to see that one. All right, have a good day. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.